At the conclusion of the Second World War, a multitude of constructions, items, and secrets belonging to the Third Reich were concealed, buried, or simply left behind. Through the years, subterranean structures, clandestine laboratories, experimental armaments, and even trains filled with gold and looted treasures have been located. Over time, personal effects have been found, like Adolf Hitler's Walther PPK pistol discovered in his bunker, Hermann Göring's ring adorned with Nazi symbols, and Hitler's opulent personal train, which was outfitted as a mobile command center. But these were not merely relics. Hidden structures also survived, such as the colossal underground complex of Project Riese in Poland, intended as a secret headquarters, the Berghof, Hitler's Alpine retreat in Bavaria, and the Führer's bunker in Berlin, where he passed his final days. These represent the most chilling secrets of Nazi Germany found in recent years. These are discoveries that reveal how far the darkness of the Third Reich extended. The Wolf's Lair Command Center of the Reich. In the dense forests of Gierus, Poland, lie the deteriorating remains of one of Nazi Germany's most clandestine and fortified complexes, the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler's initial military headquarters on the Eastern Front. It was a complex and vast bunker system, camouflaged within the woods, from which he guided the events that would determine the Third Reich's destiny. Constructed as Hitler's primary headquarters for organizing the assault on the Soviet Union, this fortress was more than just a command post. It was a stronghold of terror, comprising 80 buildings for different functions. It was encircled by 50 bunkers, explosive traps, sniper positions, barbed wire, and a maze of underground tunnels created to satisfy the wishes of a paranoid and megalomaniacal leader who distrusted every shadow and feared assassination at all times. Even now, decades after the war, visitors to the Wolf's Lair feel unsettled by its eerie remnants. Massive concrete slabs are strewn across the site, demolished by German troops desperate to protect their secrets. Nonetheless, one of the most significant aspects of the Wolf's Lair's discovery was its intricate network of hidden passages and extraordinary escape routes. Curiously, these were engineered to destroy the complex if the enemy succeeded in infiltrating or capturing it. This demonstrated the Nazis' desperation to secure an escape, or at minimum, die in the attempt. In the area surrounding the main complex, Hitler's operational theater, explosive traps were set in critical sections to allow large portions of the terrain to be instantly destroyed if the enemy advanced. Engineers obscured the bunkers with camouflage nets to prevent detection by Allied aircraft, and anti-aircraft guns were positioned nearby to defend against potential bombings. However, the most renowned event associated with this sinister complex took place on July 20, 1944, when Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg tried to assassinate Hitler with a briefcase bomb in an internal conspiracy that became known to history as Operation Valkyrie. While the precise details of the attack are still unclear today, it is known that the blast devastated the complex, yet Hitler survived. Although the unsuccessful assassination attempt left him with multiple injuries, security measures were heightened and additional barriers and traps were installed after Operation Valkyrie's failure. Nevertheless, despite its impressive defenses, Soviet forces ultimately arrived at the location in early 1945. This forced the retreating German troops to set off hundreds of explosives, leaving the lair in ruins. Today, only enormous concrete fragments and some collapsed shelters are left, serving as reminders to visitors of the terror and secrecy of a regime that once plotted within those walls to try to conquer the world. Project Riese. Deep within the Owl Mountains of Poland lies one of the most enigmatic remnants of Nazi Germany. It is an extensive complex of tunnels that was supposedly built between 1943 and 1945 in the region of Lower Silesia in Poland, known as Project Riese, or the Giant. This underground network included corridors stretching for kilometers to connect underground chambers and was part of a massive project orchestrated by the SS, who used forced laborers to carry it out.
Some historians believe the plan was to create a secure command center for high-ranking officials, even a replica of the Führer bunker to house Hitler during his domination of the Eastern Front, while others argue it may have been intended for the development of advanced weapons or resource storage. Although its ultimate purpose was never confirmed, since the project was left unfinished after the fall of Berlin to the Soviet Union, historians agree that the scale of the project was impressive. Thousands of prisoners transferred from various concentration camps were forced to work under brutal conditions, excavating rock and pouring concrete in suffocating darkness. In some sections, ventilation systems, heavy armored doors, and railway lines appeared, indicating a large-scale design intended to withstand heavy bombings. Even today, the unfinished labyrinth seems eerily abandoned mid-construction, as if its creators disappeared overnight. In fact, there are several myths tied to this extensive and mysterious network, which we will discuss later. Today, Project Ariza can be visited as a tourist site, and those who enter the tunnels experience intense chills thinking about the macabre nature of its construction. Flak towers. Relentless flak towers, rising like monolithic fortresses above Berlin's skyline, the flak towers were among the most formidable defense structures of Nazi Germany. Colossal elevated bunkers crowned with brutalist stone platforms built to protect civilians from the devastating air raids of the British Royal Air Force. Constructed in the final years of the war, these massive concrete bastions housed anti-aircraft batteries and provided shelter to about 10,000 civilians. They were even used to safeguard ammunition, classified documents, and priceless cultural artifacts. As Berlin prepared for imminent destruction, each tower complex rose proudly as a self-sufficient fortress packed with radar equipment, heavy artillery, and spotlights that could scan the skies for enemy bombers. In total, the Reich built 8 anti-aircraft tower complexes, 3 in Berlin, 2 in Hamburg, and 3 in Vienna. The fortresses were divided into 2 types: Guy towers, designed for direct combat, bristling with weaponry, and equipped with several 12.8-centimeter caliber flak anti-aircraft guns. On the other hand, there were the L towers, or guide towers, which had radars, remote command equipment, and served to coordinate defensive tactics and strategy. Each complex consisted of 1 tower of each type, and although some measured around 43 meters high, those in Berlin reached up to 70 meters. In the final stages of the war, these enormous bunkers became critical vaults where museum artifacts and archives were stored. Despite intense bombing, the thick concrete walls of the towers withstood the Allied strikes with minimal structural damage, demonstrating unmatched structural superiority. When Soviet forces pushed into Berlin in 1945, they found these fortresses had become the final frenzied refuge for desperate defenders. Today, some remains still stand as eroded ruins from a conflict that left Berlin reduced to ashes. In present day, some towers, like those in Vienna, still remain standing, reminding us of the colossal scale of the Third Reich's military engineering. The Outsee salt mine. Allied forces approached the territory occupied by the Third Reich. German officials rushed to safeguard looted cultural goods. While there were hundreds of hidden vaults, one of the largest and most spectacular treasure troves was the Outsee salt mine in Austria, where the Nazis secretly hid thousands of paintings, sculptures, and other valuable artifacts. High-ranking Nazis oversaw the relocation of truly priceless works from across Europe, hoping to preserve them to form part of the cultural heritage of the post-war Nazi Empire. Among the stolen works was the Ghent altarpiece, a masterpiece of painting by Jan van Eyck, as well as works by Camille Corot, Michelangelo, and many others. We're talking about pieces that today are worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions of euros individually, and form part of the most important private collections in the world. However, the harsh conditions inside the cold and labyrinthine mine threatened the integrity of these fragile artifacts, as moisture, cold, rockfalls, and other hostile conditions posed a serious risk. To prevent this, the SS officers in charge of the project forced laborers to build huge wooden crates, wrap large waterproof tarpaulins, and erect protective walls. Finally, as Germany's defeat loomed, the Nazi leadership chose the scorched earth option and gave the terrible order to destroy certain works of art to prevent them from falling into Allied hands. If they were not in Hitler's hands, they would be in no one's. Fortunately, local miners who had organized into a small, peaceful resistance managed to secretly sabotage the SS plan using fake explosives or redirecting bombs so they would detonate far from critical areas. Once the region fell under Allied control, the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives program, later known as the Monuments Men, raced against time to recover and document the treasures hidden in the Altois mine. When President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered a cultural sweep of the site, this treasure hunt became one of the greatest art recovery efforts in modern history.
The impossible disappearance. The Second World War left behind many unsettling mysteries, but the vanishing of the Amber Room remains one of the most extraordinary. How could an entire room filled with gold and treasures disappear? Though it may sound like the plot of a crazy movie, this actually happened, and to this day it continues to astonish even the most skeptical historians. Originally, the room was designed as a dazzling spatial masterpiece of 55 meters, with walls covered by amber panels totaling 6 tons of this expensive material and adorned with gold sculptures, mirrors, and other invaluable gemstone artifacts. Built in the early 1700s in Berlin, in 1716 the room was gifted to Tsar Peter the Great and installed in the Catherine Palace, located in the Tsar's village near St. Petersburg, becoming the 8th wonder of the world. And there it remained until the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. When Reich forces captured the Catherine Palace, they did the unthinkable. The Nazis stole the Amber Room. The entire room was dismantled and transported to Königsberg Castle, where it was last seen before vanishing without a trace. While its disappearance alone is chilling, what makes the Amber Room one of the greatest mysteries surrounding Nazi power are the dark legends that surround it. Some historians propose that it was hidden in a secret Nazi bunker, equipped with traps to prevent it from being found. Others claim it was loaded aboard the ship Wilhelm Gustloff, which mysteriously disappeared in the Baltic Sea, allegedly torpedoed by a Soviet submarine, possibly transporting the room and other looted treasures. Unofficial sources claim that many treasure hunters died under mysterious circumstances while searching for the Amber Room, a myth that fed the belief in a curse surrounding the vanished wonder. What is certain is that the pursuit of the Amber Room continued for decades, sweeping through secret tunnels, abandoned mines, and ruins devastated by war. Some parts were found in Königsberg Castle, which was brutally bombed by the British Royal Air Force in 1944, being reduced almost to ashes. Some claim that most of the room was destroyed along with the castle, although other parts, such as certain mosaics and individual decorations, were found in Germany, Italy, and strange locations, leading to the theory that the impressive room was torn apart and sent to hundreds of destinations throughout occupied Europe. In 2003, a reconstructed Amber Room was inaugurated, which includes some of the parts that survived the Second World War and were recovered by the Allies. However, the fate of the original 8th wonder of the world was never discovered and continues to haunt historians and plague the dreams of treasure hunters around the world. The power of evil. In late 1944, German physicists rushed to unlock atomic energy for military use, a capability that would have forever changed the outcome of the war. In the small town of Haigerloch in southwestern Germany, a select group of Nazi researchers moved into a brewery cellar, which was converted into an impressive secret laboratory. There they began assembling a nuclear reactor based on heavy water, aiming to replicate the results of the American Manhattan Project and give Hitler the ultimate weapon. Built underground and covered by a defensive bunker to protect it from bombings and aerial detection, the reactor began to be tested at the start of 1945, with the Allies already pressing at the borders of the Third Reich. The project known as B8 was led by scientists like the legendary Werner Heisenberg, who headed a team feverishly trying to create a self-sustaining chain reaction, a step that could have changed the course of history. But the war was nearing its end, and evidence of Germany's fall hindered the reactor's development. The researchers faced resource limitations, disrupted supply chains, and constant Allied bombings that managed to stall the progress of Nazi nuclear technology. Heavy water shipments from Norway, a crucial resource for operating a reactor, were repeatedly sabotaged by Allied forces. As the enemies closed in on Germany, the team's success drifted further away, though their final experiments continued under the watchful eyes of SS officers who were already utterly desperate to obtain some advantage. In 1945, with the war practically lost, the Americans launched Operation Alsos, a coordinated effort by the Manhattan Project to infiltrate, recover, and redirect all Nazi research in the field of atomic energy. It didn't take long for them to discover the secret site in Haigerloch, and when they raided the laboratory, they found a chilling discovery. The reactor was very close to completion and intact, with uranium cubes suspended from rods, suggesting just how dangerously close the Nazis had come to unlocking nuclear energy. Fearing what might have been, Allied experts quickly dismantled the reactor and took its components for analysis. The underground site was later transformed into a museum, where the remains of the reactor apparatus lie in the original cave, an unsettling relic of a terrifying possibility.
As the Allied invasion advanced, high-ranking Nazi German authorities rushed to hide enormous reserves of gold and currency, which they had looted from millions of Jews, Romani people, and other victims across occupied Europe. But when American troops entered the German town of Merkers in April 1945, they stumbled upon one of the war's most astonishing and dazzling discoveries, a massive secret treasure buried deep within the local salt mine. The soldiers were not expecting to find one of the largest gold reserves in the world when they descended several kilometers underground, which is why they were completely stunned upon seeing a vast hoard of bags piled in huge tunnels as far as the eye could see. At first, they believed it might be construction materials or munitions, but the surprise grew even greater when they discovered that the burlap sacks flooding the site were filled with gold and silver bars and coins. Much of the Reichsbank's funds and other confiscated assets had been transported there in hopes of a supposed Hitler victory, which would allow the stolen goods to be laundered. But the salt mine's tunnels led to very deep places, and the tons of gold were only the beginning of the discoveries. Later on, the Allies found more hidden treasures, entire crates filled with confiscated artwork, personal belongings stolen from Holocaust victims, and piles of foreign coins and bills. These discoveries revealed the full extent of the Nazis' ruthless looting and expropriation operations, and shed light on the incredible wealth transfer that had taken place in Germany during the 1930s and laid the economic foundation of Hitler's regime. Many items were filmed and photographed, as each artifact told a grim story of looting and suffering. In addition to precious metals, the recovered items included paintings from notable European collections taken as spoils of war. Members of the Monuments Men, a specialized Allied unit tasked with treasure recovery and heritage restoration,
rushed to secure the stolen masterpieces, while top Allied leaders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, traveled to the mine to witness the incredible discovery firsthand. The documentation and photographs from the Merkers mine became crucial evidence in later trials against Nazi officials and officers, and served to hold them accountable for the looting and crimes committed in the occupied territories. They also helped historians gain a broader understanding of the sinister economic dimension that underpinned the Third Reich. The poisonous legacy. In February 1945, the German submarine U-864 embarked on Operation Caesar, a dangerous mission involving the covert transportation of aircraft components made of high-quality steel and liquid mercury to a secret destination in Japan. This valuable cargo was intended to reinforce Axis collaboration on advanced weapons technology to give the Empire of the Rising Sun some breathing room in the face of the overwhelming American advance. However, the Germans hadn't accounted for an unexpected factor. The Allies had cracked the Axis radio encryption methods and were aware of the operation and the route U-864 was supposed to take. The British submarine HMS Venturer quickly departed from the port of Reich to hunt down the German vessel. On February 6, 1945, the Venturer intercepted U-864 off the coast of Norway, and they engaged in a dramatic torpedo battle, which would become the only recorded submarine-to-submarine duel in history. After a tense chase, the submarines engaged in a slow-motion combat in which the Venturer launched 4 torpedoes at U-864. The German sub managed to evade the first 3, but was hit by the last one. Despite the desperate efforts of its 73-man crew to avert disaster, U-864 sank to the ocean floor, taking with it the lives of its operators and its deadly cargo. In 2003, the wreckage of U-864 was found at the bottom of the sea, revealing a chilling disaster. The submarine structure had broken apart, releasing 67 tons of toxic mercury that contaminated about 30,000 meters of surrounding waters. The containers full of the poisonous element posed a massive environmental threat, prompting Norwegian authorities to propose a containment plan that took more than 10 years to complete and cost the equivalent of around 200 million euros. Since removing the wreck of U-864 was extremely dangerous due to the risk of spreading even more mercury and the fact that the submarine contained live torpedoes and mines, Norwegian officials decided to cover the remains with 100,000 tons of sand and rock strategically placed. This succeeded in reducing the leakage of harmful materials, and U-864 remains buried to this day in an underwater grave carefully monitored by environmental authorities.
The ghost train. According to some apocryphal historians, in the final days of the war, Nazi authorities in Poland were ordered to move gold and treasures expropriated from occupied territories back to Germany, believing they could seize those resources and hide them from the Allies. We've already mentioned some desperate vaults, such as the Merkers salt mine or the Flock Towers. However, there exists an even stranger myth. According to these historians, the Nazis loaded a massive train with gold bars, artworks, and precious artifacts, which departed from Brelo and was meant to stop at several Polish stations on its way to Germany. However, the train, which supposedly stopped at the station in Freiburg, Silesia, disappeared after resuming its journey. The idea of a freight train vanishing into thin air sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but it all points to either the train never having existed or the Nazis using some sort of secret alternate route to get it off the Allies' radar. On the one hand, historians claim the story is plausible, not only because there are records of artifacts and artworks looted by the Nazis that were never recovered, like the already mentioned Amber Room, but also because the supposed route of the ghost train coincides with various treasure vaults we've talked about, like the Merkers Mine and Project Dereza. For decades, the whereabouts of the Nazi gold train remained a myth among historians and World War II enthusiasts. However, the story resurfaced with force in European popular culture in 2015
when two mining entrepreneurs claimed to have found proof of the existence of a hidden stretch of railway underground near the city of Wozzeck. These men didn't give many details, as they demanded a large sum of money from the Polish government and a guarantee contract that they and their companies would have exclusive rights to the search. But basic information leaked, and hundreds of treasure hunters flocked to the area to investigate on their own, spurring geological and topographical explorations and negotiating with authorities for drilling permits. Thanks to the persistence and efforts of the relic hunters, Polish officials agreed to carry out an underground search in what became known as Kilometer 65 of Lower Silesia. The government oversaw part of the excavation efforts, but in truth, no verifiable remains of an armored train, let alone lost treasures, were ever found. Critics argued that the local myth, fueled by anecdotal testimonies, overshadowed the lack of tangible evidence. Nevertheless, the rumor persists, often linked to a wider complex of tunnels, a conspiratorial idea claiming that there are secret rail passages connecting the German chancellery to various areas on the Eastern Front. Still, not everyone lost out from this story, as local municipal authorities took advantage of the worldwide attention the myth generated and used it to boost tourism in Wozzeck. Local media covered even minor events, such as unusual ground-penetrating radar readings, and conducted extensive interviews to trace historical records, pointing out the routes taken by German trains in the final days of the war. The fascination with the Nazi gold train remains a terrifying reminder of the desperate chaos within the Third Reich as it faced its inevitable collapse. The shocking Nazi UFO. When the Third Reich crumbled, rumors emerged about an ultra-secret Nazi superweapon, a device so advanced that it was supposedly going to change the course of the war at the last minute. In truth, this myth accompanied the discovery of dozens of Nazi superweapons, known as the Wunderwaffen, or wonder weapons. While some of these were indeed carried out, most never went beyond the realm of crazy ideas from engineers close to Hitler, who was prone to fantasizing about designs worthy of science fiction. But there was one project in particular that still baffles researchers and historians to this day. We're talking about Die Glocke, which means the bell. This enigmatic machine became one of the most chilling and controversial mysteries of the Second World War. Die Glocke is described as a device made of a hard, heavy metal with an approximate diameter of 2.7 meters and a height between 3.7 and 4.6 meters, having a shape similar to that of a large bell. According to plans and reports found by researchers, this apparatus contained two counter-rotating cylinders that would be filled with a mercury-like substance, violet in color. This metallic liquid, whose existence was never confirmed, had the code name Zerum 525 and was stored in a tall, thin thermos about 1 meter high, encapsulated in lead, hinting at its supposed toxicity. According to these accounts, when the bell was activated, it had a radius of action of 150 to 200 meters, within which crystals would form on animal cellular tissues. Blood would coagulate and separate, while plants decomposed into a fat-like substance. Supposedly, during the development of the dangerous device, 5 of the 7 scientists who originally worked on the project died due to these effects. Tests are believed to have been carried out where the ruins of a concrete structure nicknamed the Henge now stand near the Venislaus mine, about 3 kilometers southeast of the main SOC complex of the underground project Riesa, which may also have served as a test platform for an experiment on anti-gravity propulsion generated by the bell. Other accounts placed it at a facility near the Czech border guarded by the SS. Most historians accepted by the academic community consider the stories linked to the bell to be mere hearsay, as it appears in very little official documentation from wartime. No confirmed blueprint or official reference has ever surfaced, aside from scattered anecdotes. However, it is speculated that fragments of real research projects may have been distorted over time. It is fairly well accepted that the Nazis experimented in fields like propulsion and particle physics, often scattered across multiple secret laboratories. But despite the chilling allure of the story, it is possible that Die Glocke is simply a fabrication that merges various separate technological efforts into one fantastical tale. Still, the doubt persists to this day, and many UFO and conspiracy theory enthusiasts believe that Die Glocke was part of an ultra-secret project that sought to create flying saucers capable of escaping a war-ravaged Earth. But if that's true, why was it abandoned? Was there an accident? Or did something even more sinister happen? Tell us in the comments.
The first stealth plane in history. Among the most curious discoveries in Nazi aviation research, the Horten HO-229 stands out as a hauntingly futuristic relic of the Second World War. Created by the Horten brothers, this jet-powered flying wing featured a radical design that reduced radar cross-section, eerily foreshadowing the development of modern stealth bombers. The completed prototypes underwent flight tests that revealed aerodynamics so advanced they could rival concepts later used in contemporary aircraft, like the B-2 Spirit bomber. Although the HO-229 was primarily built of plywood and other lightweight composites, the aerodynamic shape of the HO-229 was aimed at minimizing drag and achieving high speeds, making use of its dual-jet engines. The Luftwaffe saw great potential in a fast fighter bomber that could outpace Allied aircraft. The Horten HO-229 was a single-seat aircraft, 7.4 meters long, with a wingspan of 16.8 meters. Its glider-like shape gave it a height at the nose of just 2.81 meters, with a 1-meter-tall cockpit. As a flying wing, its wing surface area was 50.2 meters squared. When empty, the HO-229 weighed 6,400 kilograms, to which 1,700 kilograms of fuel could be added, allowing for a maximum operational range of 1,900 kilometers. The bomb load reached up to 2,000 kilograms, surpassing the expectations of the head of the Luftwaffe. Fully loaded, the HO-229 could weigh up to 8,100 kilograms. This entire book had to fly at speeds close to 1,000 kilometers per hour. While the Horten brothers never quite reached that figure, they came close. The power plant consisted of two Junkers Jumo 0004B turbojet engines, which gave the aircraft a maximum speed of 960 kilometers per hour, with a cruising speed of 900 kilometers per hour and a service ceiling of 15,000 meters. In addition to typical bombs of the era, the HO-229 featured two Mk-108 30mm cannons. The first test of this aerial Wunderwaffe took place on March 1, 1944. The trial was relatively successful, though the design presented some issues that made the pilot's task difficult. In addition to wood, light metal alloys were used to reduce air resistance and improve radar stealth. On February 2, 1945, the definitive version of the HO-229 was tested, but tragedy struck the prototype. One of the engines stalled mid-flight, and the pilot had to perform a miraculous maneuver to save both his life and the aircraft. Despite this, development continued. The Allies were at Berlin's gates, and the Nazis were desperate for a miracle weapon. But it never came. The Horten HO-229 never left the hangars to join the fight. Hitler's regime fell before that could happen. In 1945, the Allies found the HO-229, which was captured as part of Operation Paperclip, an effort by the West to take advantage of the technology developed by the Nazis, as well as their top engineers and scientists. The prototype was taken to England and later to the United States, where it found a home between the Smithsonian Museum and the workshops of Northrop Grumman, the company that created the B-2 Spirit bomber, a strategic stealth bomber that has managed to capture the essence of the Horten HO-229. To this day, the Americans continued to study the Horton brothers' developments, which, although they never saw the light of day, proved to be a fundamental contribution to U.S. military aviation technology. The first stealth plane in history. The belly of the beast. The remote coastal area of Peenemünde in northern Germany was a testing center for some of the war's most ambitious weapons programs, led by Wernher von Braun and other notable Nazi engineers. The facility produced the V-1 flying bomb and the V-2 rocket, both considered terrifying marvels of early rocket and missile development, and they were conceived as vengeance weapons intended to strike Britain in retaliation for bombings against Berlin and later other targets to break Allied morale. The V-1 flying bomb was a primitive jet-propelled missile shaped like a small pilotless aircraft, often detected by its distinctive buzzing sound. One could say it's the grandfather of today's explosive drones. The V-2 rocket, on the other hand, was the world's first long-range ballistic missile, and although it couldn't yet carry nuclear warheads, it had an extremely large range, arrived without warning, and was capable of destroying large areas in a single strike. Although these weapons caused massive damage and widespread panic in England, their overall strategic impact was limited due to late deployment and the industrial difficulties at the end of the war, which prevented mass production. Nonetheless, development at Peenemünde laid the groundwork for future space exploration, and many of its scientists were absorbed by the U.S. or the Soviet Union after the war in the aforementioned Operation Paperclip. In August 1943, British bombers launched Operation Hydra, targeting the Peenemünde facilities, aiming to disrupt the research and production of all the bombs and missiles manufactured at the macabre Nazi factory. The attacks annihilated the complex, killing key personnel and delaying rocket programs, though only temporarily. The Nazis were still well organized, and under von Braun's direction, ballistic tests and developments continued in other hidden laboratories. After Germany's surrender, Allied teams launched a massive raid on Peenemünde and seized documents, technological components, and several complete rockets. The site's analysis revealed that several breakthroughs had been made regarding advanced techniques for propulsion and guidance systems for ballistic missiles, knowledge later exploited by both the Americans and Soviets in their own weapons programs during the Cold War. Even today, entire sections of the test field remain scattered with concrete debris, silent witnesses of a race that briefly made Germany a pioneer in rocket technology. The Sleeping Giants. When Germany occupied the Channel Islands in 1940, they became the only British territory captured by the Nazis during the war. Hitler declared the islands a strategic stronghold and ordered the construction of formidable defenses, which included coastal gun emplacements, radar towers, and underground bunkers. Quickly, various concrete bastions sprang up in Guernsey, Jersey, and the smaller islands. At first, the Germans decided to be benevolent with the non-Jewish population of the islands and recruited local workers to build roads and strategic posts. However, as the war progressed, the relationship with the islanders deteriorated, and the SS decided to open forced labor camps, which included Jews and prisoners from both the local population and from Ukraine and later the Soviet Union. Thousands of prisoners brought from forced labor camps in continental Europe were forced to carry out the brutal task of completing terrifying fortifications, including intricate tunnel networks and reinforced towers built into rocky outcrops. Some bunkers concealed warehouses full of ammunition, weapons, equipment, and supplies to withstand prolonged sieges that might come from the United Kingdom. As part of the Atlantic War Plan, the Nazis erected tall concrete towers with machine gun nests and cannons manned by thousands of soldiers. The islands remained under German control even after continental France was liberated. By late 1944, the fortress had become a highly optimized outpost, but it was surrounded by the Allied pincer and completely cut off from regular supply lines. As resources dwindled, Nazi officers and soldiers began sealing off bunkers and checkpoints, retreating into the most fortified areas as they awaited the imminent invasion of enemy forces. When the islands were liberated in May 1945, days after Germany's official surrender, Allied soldiers discovered entire underground complexes. After capturing all the German soldiers on the islands, the Allies opened all the bunkers, fortresses, warehouses, and vaults, and found that the occupation forces had very limited supplies, though they were well armed. Considering that demolition would damage the island, the Allied authorities decided to seal the tunnels but did not destroy most of the fortifications, leaving many bunkers and towers intact. Today, some have been preserved or turned into museums, illustrating just how thoroughly the occupiers had turned these picturesque islands into defensive positions. The Nazis' strategic theft. Beyond the famous works of art, the Nazis also confiscated personal possessions, especially items belonging to Jewish families who had been murdered or taken to concentration camps. When the Allies swept through Frankfurt after conquering the city, they confiscated large quantities of valuables that had been stolen or literally torn from millions of victims through physical violence or unjust discriminatory laws of expropriation. In the final stages of the war, these items were gathered and hidden in buildings or underground storage sites to prevent them from falling into Allied hands, although the vast majority were found almost immediately when American forces entered the city. Intelligence units focused on locating boxes of jewelry, gold, and cultural artifacts, and searched abandoned factories, basements, and vaults beneath financial institutions. In one case, they discovered a swimming pool filled with wedding rings, gold dental fillings, and other personal effects, forcibly taken from deported people. These macabre discoveries highlighted the extent of the systematic theft that enriched Nazi officials and financed part of Hitler's war effort. The good life the Germans enjoyed had been bought with the blood of millions of civilians. The Eagle's Nest. In the Bavarian Alps lies a building known as the Eagle's Nest, a mix between a small mansion and a fortress built as a 50th birthday gift for Hitler. Located atop a mountain above Berchtesgaden, the structure, officially named Kaustein House, served as a retreat and meeting place for Nazi leaders. Due to its high elevation, an elaborate road was built that ends in a stone tunnel leading to a very luxurious elevator made of polished bronze adorned with Venetian mirrors and green-toned leather. This large lift rises 134 meters directly into the building. In the final clashes of the Second World War, Allied forces advanced into southern Germany, expecting the area to become a final bastion of resistance. Despite its imposing appearance, the Eagle's Nest was taken without major difficulties. In the surroundings of Obersalzberg, complexes of bombed-out villas and bunkers revealed personal documents, propaganda material, and some looted goods. Soldiers walked through lavishly decorated rooms and discovered how the most important figures relaxed in relative comfort, even as their regime collapsed. In later years, the building was first used by the U.S. Army, which installed offices throughout the site, and then returned it to German administration. Today, the Eagle's Nest functions as a tourist attraction, with a panoramic view that stretches across the Alpine valleys, accessed through the historic elevator that once carried Hitler to his mountain retreat. The heart of the mountains. In the final stages of the war, Germany found itself cornered by the advancing Soviet Union, which came as a red wave from the east, crushing all of the Nazis' armament facilities on the Eastern Front. For that reason, the Nazi military leadership deemed it necessary to move production facilities underground while also reinforcing defenses to protect them from Allied air attacks. One of those sites emerged in the Harz Mountains, where thousands of prisoners lived out their final days in underground forced labor camps, digging tunnels to convert them into makeshift weapons factories. Railway lines extended deep into these hidden complexes, enabling discreet transport of raw materials. However, trains couldn't always meet demand, and by the end of the war, the Nazis forced workers to carry raw materials up the mountain using mules. These factories produced small arms, tank parts, and ammunition, operating far from prying eyes. Evidence was also found that Baron Braun planned to expand V-1 and V-2 missile production at the site, although only the blueprints were discovered when U.S. forces arrived in April 1945. They captured entire underground workshops. Abandoned machinery, half-assembled weapons, and stockpiles of ammunition littered the corridors. Investigators concluded that the intense bombing campaigns had forced the shift to these underground plants, where ventilation, lighting, and worker accommodations were often improvised. Planners prioritized maintaining the flow of production over ensuring safe working conditions, leading prisoners to endure brutal hardships, resulting in the deaths of between 10,000 and 20,000 forced laborers. Some tunnels housed advanced prototypes, but many were simple extensions of existing production lines. The capture of the Harz also cast a dark stain on the U.S. Army, as some divisions advancing through the mountains executed large groups of workers transporting raw materials. It was later verified that many of these workers were SS prisoners living in the gruesome camps in the area. Some soldiers were tried for these crimes. Over the years, local governments found remnants of bombs and dangerous chemicals, and the area has had to be swept multiple times for hidden mines and other civilian threats. To this day, the submerged passages still pose dangers, with structural instability and potential unexploded ordnance. The tunnels of the Harz Mountains are a clear testament to the Reich's conviction and madness in pursuit of its expansionist plans. The final desperateness. When Allied intelligence detected signs of hidden projects in central Germany, they focused on the forested hills of Thuringia. Reports indicated an extensive system of tunnels and chambers built for undisclosed purposes. The Allies could hardly have imagined they were observing the existence of Mittelburg, which was thought to be Hitler's last desperate refuge and the Nazi High Command's fallback location outside of Berlin. Though today it is known as Mittelwerk, the massive underground complex was made up of various facilities with code names and had been dug near cities like Jonau, eventually joined through a complex network of tunnels of varying diameters. Most of the construction was carried out by prisoners forced to excavate rocky terrain that in the minds of SS officers would become command centers, administrative offices, and resource storage depots. In some cases, the more complete structures showed a high level of sophistication. They could be accessed via hermetically sealed hatches, had complex ventilation systems, and even featured radiation and bomb-resistant walls. This led several historians to propose that nuclear or missile research may have been carried out in certain areas of Mittelwerk, but in truth, no physical evidence has ever confirmed this hypothesis. American and Soviet troops who arrived in 1945 conducted large-scale studies of these sites, combing them thoroughly and leaving no corner unexplored. Generally, they found incomplete hallways, partially installed structures, ventilation shafts, and occasionally heavy machinery. Documentation about future plans was scarce, and captured German officials gave vague or contradictory statements. After the occupation forces extracted anything of value from the tunnels, access to Mittelwerk was restricted. After all, most of it was half-finished, and the risk of collapse was constant. In the following decades, historians and local explorers revisited these underground networks and discovered remnants of construction materials and structural diagrams. Some tunnel entrances had collapsed, and others were sealed by authorities.
The true final purpose of this immense network of underground complexes remains a topic of debate among historians and researchers, as the designs of the chambers and their strategic positions suggest they could have been used either to establish a headquarters similar to the Führer bunker, or to manufacture weapons, as occurred in the Harz Mountains. However, the enormous expenditure of resources on these reinforced tunnels highlighted the regime's desperation as it mobilized thousands of workers to create hideouts that ultimately never reached full operation before defeat. The extension of Mittelbauer. Mittelbauer, located in the Harz region, was a notorious concentration camp complex specifically designed for the secret production of armaments. Beneath the brutal barracks and gas chambers lay a network of intermediate tunnels that connected to Mittelbauer. But unlike that enormous complex whose purpose remains unknown, Mittelbauer housed an infamous V-2 rocket factory, which used Jews as forced labor under inhumane conditions. Shifts lasted long hours, food was terribly scarce, and medical care was non-existent. Because the prisoners worked with hazardous chemicals and heavy machinery, the catacombs were filled with dust and deadly vapors, posing lethal risks to detainees. While the exact number of fatalities is unknown, it is believed that more than 20,000 people died building missiles in the tunnels of Mittelbauer. When U.S. forces arrived in April 1945, they witnessed an environment designed to exploit forced labor at any cost. Rows of partially assembled rockets and technical drawings filled the cavernous corridors. Wooden bunks crammed into damp corners showed how the prisoners lived and died mere steps from the toxic production underway. Allied experts seized documentation and vital components of the V-2 rocket, which were sent to the United States for further study. Later, authorities discovered mass graves nearby, giving insight into the number of victims resulting from brutal labor quotas and minimal safety measures. Efforts to dismantle the site progressed rapidly, and occupation forces deployed specialized teams who collaborated with local residents, many of whom had suspected something strange was going on, especially since they heard daily explosions echoing through the hills. They later learned it had been the rocket engines igniting during test flights. Although much of the Mittelbauer infrastructure was sealed or demolished, some sections of the tunnel system remain accessible today for educational purposes. Operation Bernhard. Operation Bernhard was a bold yet rather pathetic plan designed by German intelligence to flood the British economy with counterfeit banknotes. Launched in 1942, the Reich assembled a team composed of printing technicians, currency engravers, and concentration camp prisoners with some printing experience to produce near-perfect forgeries of British pound notes. This fraudulent money aimed to devalue the British currency, thereby disrupting the country's financial stability. The operation was moved several times and was eventually set up in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, located on the outskirts of Berlin. Under the strictest secrecy, prisoners worked day and night with specialized plates, high-quality paper, and inks to produce thousands upon thousands of forged banknotes. What's impressive is that the final product was surprisingly authentic, to the point that many bills successfully entered circulation. This motivated the Reich to further invest in the curious plan, and by 1945, millions of pounds in counterfeit currency had been printed. When the Allies liberated Sachsenhausen, SS personnel tried to hide or destroy the printing equipment. Some forged bills were thrown into remote lakes or transported to different sites. From Germany, 400 million pounds in counterfeit notes were sent to Switzerland, which at the time was an enormous sum of money. After the war, investigators discovered caches filled with fake banknotes, printing plates, and even administrative records that documented production details and maintained accounting logs as if it were an unofficial mint. Thanks to this evidence, the Allies were able to expose these activities, showing how Germany had attempted financial sabotage in addition to conventional warfare. The notes discovered in Austrian lakes and abandoned trucks provided tangible proof of an operation that combined artisanal cunning with forced labor. Operation Bernhard went down in history as one of the most bizarre military plans of all time, though its true success remains debated even to this day. The Führer Bunker. The final entry among the most chilling secrets of Nazi Germany in World War II takes us beneath the ruined streets of Berlin to the Führer Bunker, the underground shelter used by Hitler and his inner circle during his final hours. Commissioned by the Nazi leadership and built by the company Hawk AG, this underground complex of 28 rooms was designed to house Hitler and a small number of confidants for a short period, functioning more as an air raid shelter than as a true residence. The construction progressed quickly under the direction of architect Karl Piepenburg, with hundreds of workers laboring in 3 8-hour shifts, completing the work in just a few months. Between 1936 and 1944, the structure was completed in stages, connecting above with the old Reichskanzlei and the German Chancellery through reinforced corridors. By early 1945, as Soviet artillery bombarded the city, key figures of the regime withdrew into this confined warren of concrete rooms. Inside, officials devised strategies and pinned propaganda maps to the walls, tracking divisions that no longer existed. Generals delivered grim reports to leaders who were increasingly disconnected from reality. During the Battle of Berlin, the bunker endured continuous bombing. Although it remained largely intact, death, despair, and final orders defined the atmosphere. At the end of April, Hitler and Eva Braun were married in a small ceremony just hours before ending their lives. A group of soldiers carried the bodies of the Führer and his wife out of the bunker and burned them in the Chancellery courtyard. Days later, other prominent figures followed Hitler's lead, destroying files and personal effects beforehand. When Soviet troops secured the area, they discovered empty corridors full of documents and evidence of frantic attempts to burn any record of Nazi activities. For decades after the war, post-war authorities demolished parts of the bunker. Today, the remains lie beneath modern apartment buildings and parking areas, with only a discreet plaque marking the location. Though the site still draws occasional interest, it remains largely inaccessible.